Hi everyone.
Hi, Miss Jackie.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you kind of felt like an outsider?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you about a situation where I felt not only like an outsider, but I felt really old. I'm going to tell you about the time back in spring semester of 2010 when I was a graduate student here at Penn State, and I decided to not just observe, but take Psych 401, which is a clinical application of psychology. Why did I take this class? Because at that time, as a graduate student, I was interested in how talk between people helps people feel better. More specifically, how a therapist would talk to a patient. Okay, so I needed to take kind of a general introduction to clinical psychology, and that's why I took this class. So today I'm going to talk to you about several things. First, I want to talk about the classroom itself. Then I'm going to talk about the teacher. I'll talk about the students, the content of the course, and then I will talk about my experience about all of those things. Let's see if I can use this. Perfect. So the classroom. The classroom was actually, it says a bit larger than Wagner, this room, but actually now that I'm looking at it, it was much larger than this space. And it was located in Willard Building on campus, which is pretty centrally located near Old Main. And I remember it was actually a very busy building. There were a lot of classrooms in there and a lot of students coming in and out and things like that. But it was generally quite the same in terms of technology, such as this. There was a screen, there was the podium that the professor stood next to. Speaking of the professor, so the teacher was actually only a few years older than me. And I remember first attending that class, I sat in the back and I felt very old. And I felt like everyone was younger than me. I felt a little bit out of place. The teacher, however, was relaxed. He was fun, but very professional. I really liked that he gave students choices for assignments. So in this class, I think we don't have any choice. I tell you what to do and you do it. But he had a really nice system where he had a list of 5 different types of projects, and you got to choose which one you wanted to do, which I thought was really nice. Something else I noticed in the class was that the teacher, the teacher spoke most of the time. It was usually just him talking with not a lot of engagement from the students in the class. Something I noticed also is that he always had a PowerPoint, and the students really liked that he started every class with a multiple choice question on the board. And those questions that he used on the PowerPoint would eventually go into like a test. So the students always paid attention when he had that multiple choice question on the board. I thought that was a good method. The students, it was about a medium-sized class. There were approximately 40 to 50 in each class. I noticed that students often arrived late, and some students were actually absent quite a bit. And I even noticed that when it rained, very few students were in the class, which was interesting to me. I think a lot of students don't want to leave their room when it's raining outside.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just interesting to me. Anyway, so the content that I'm going to focus on today is the difference between strange behavior and pathological behavior. So this is a psychology class, right? And what I remember, one of the classes that I remember the most from this class is how the professor described the difference between behavior that's just weird and behavior that's actually a physical or mental disorder. And I'll never forget the example he gave. He said that he had a friend in college that wherever they went to eat, at a restaurant, on campus, wherever, this friend would steal the salt and pepper shakers. And so that behavior is really weird, right? But does it mean he has a mental problem? No, he's maybe just a little strange, okay? So compare that to a person with a major mental disorder, someone who cannot stop themselves from stealing from stores or stealing money. That's actually, we have a word for that called kleptomania, where you cannot help yourself from stealing something. So this course was really about these pathological behaviors, so things that are kind of wrong in your head. And I remember thinking that that was really interesting because of the anecdote that he used. I'll never forget that because he used that anecdote with his weird friend who would steal the salt and pepper. All right, so my experience in general. There were some things that I found surprising and some things that I did not find surprising at all. So it was not surprising that students don't participate equally. There were the students in the front of the class who always answered, and the students in the back, like me, who didn't participate very much. But what I was surprised is how long it took for students to answer the question. So the professor would ask a question, and I'd wait, and nobody would talk until maybe a few seconds later. And I always remember feeling bad for the professor, like, why weren't they answering his question? Of course, I could have answered the question, but I didn't. I wasn't surprised by how often students came late, but I was surprised by how casually students dressed. I was really surprised by that. Like, some people came in their pajamas, you know, just really casually dressed. So that was interesting for me. What I would do differently, the class size I think was really big. It was hard to engage students. I might try using something like Kahoot if I were him. But still at the end of the day, I felt like the oldest person in the room, but I think the professor ended up making the content pretty interesting. Any questions? Yes?
How your experiences related to the topic, like you feel like outside, an outside.
Yeah.
How is connected
To
together?
the topic of the content of the class?
Yeah.
I think it kind of sums up how I felt in that class in general. So in general, my experience was that I felt like an outsider. I felt older than everyone else. And that also made me hesitate to participate because I didn't want everybody to notice that I was the oldest person in the room, and also that I was more articulate. Does that make sense? Because if a graduate student raises their hand in an undergraduate class, maybe I failed to mention that this was an undergraduate class.
Okay.
That was an important detail that I forgot to mention. So this was an undergraduate class, and I'm a grad student, you know, in my 30s. And I didn't want anybody to notice the way I talked and the way I looked, because then it would be like, you know, who's this old lady in the class, right? Yeah. And I always sat in the back because I didn't want anybody to see me.
What do you think the main reason that the people is absent in the class?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it has to do with group mentality. The bigger the class, the smaller the risk of being absent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the class is boring, or they are absent for a reason.
Oh, that's a great question. I think if you ask students why they're absent, there'd be a range of answers. Some students were really interested in the class. Some students obviously probably were not. I think the weather, that changes things. When Thon happened, lots of students were absent because of Thon. Yeah, so lots of different reasons. Yeah.
Can you participate in a class observing?
Oh, that's a good question. You can try. If you've already emailed the professor and they know that you're there, that's probably a safe bet that you can. But if you just show up and it's like, who is this person? Why are they talking? All right, let's stop there. So, thank